This video is about the concept of mikvah immersion in Judaism. Now, when the temple stood, immersion in a mikvah primarily was for the purposes of renewing the state of impurity that was caused by a dead body. But once the temple was destroyed in 70, the second temple, mikvah took on other purposes. But first let's define what a mikvah is. Mikvah is a body of living water. So that would be a river, a lake, an ocean, where living things are. Now, in certain climates and in certain conditions, people are not near a body of living water, so they make one, kind of like a pool, and you can use natural water besides tap water. So for example, the mikvah that we use for conversion purposes, there's a hole in the wall, a plug, and you take the plug out, and the ice that's melted, that water mixes with the tap water, and that makes it a kosher mikvah. Now, Jews have taken this very seriously for a very long time. For example, Masada, which is in the middle of the desert, they had a mikvah. They had very precious water needs, and they still use their water for mikvah purposes. And people will go a long distance to find a mikvah, a kosher mikvah, in cold climates, for example. The reason is that post the temple, the primary use of the mikvah was for women following their menstrual cycle to immerse in a body of living water before they could resume marital relations. That's why if you've been to Israel and you go to most hotels, you see that they don't have like queen size and king size beds. They have two single beds that the couple can push apart during the menstrual cycle for the women. And the theory is that it enhances the marital relationship during the time when they're allowed to have relations, and then when the woman's menstruating and they don't have relations. It's kind of the opposite of the Catholic Church, because here you're suggesting more intimate relations during the fertile period of the women, as opposed to the Rimada method of the Catholic Church, which is the opposite. Now, one of the things that we know from anthropology is that there's an ancient blood taboo, that ancient people in antiquity were afraid or had to deal with the problem of bodily emissions. You can imagine how, before it was understood scientifically, the free flow of blood that didn't kill a woman was frightening. And so all the ancient Near Eastern people, from the research from George Foot Moore, our great Harvard professor of religion, the early part of the 1900s, and others, documented that the ancient Near East had this blood taboo, and the way to resolve it was to immerse in a body of living water. But even knowing that, many modern Jewish women and couples have decided to take on the significance of mikvah. Now, it's not only used for the purposes of following the menstrual cycle, it's also used primarily in the conservative movement and to some extent by reform for the purposes of conversion. The conservative rabbinate requires all converts to go immerse in a mikvah following the meeting with the rabbinic tribunal to complete their conversion. They immerse 3 times. There's 2 blessings that are recited. The first is the commandment upon immersion, then the shachayanu, and that's done in the complete privacy. There's a female witness for females, male witnesses for males, and it's usually done in a set building that has a pool designed specifically for this purpose. Not actually a swimming pool, but a kind of a large bath, a deep bath of 4 or 5 feet. There's certain specifications of how much water it has to contain. And many people consider it a very beautiful experience. There's many reasons for it. For example, if you think about transformation of an entity in the womb of a mother and it kind of bathed in a liquid and then emerges into the real world, so too does the new Jewish person emerge out of the mikvah. And people now go for other purposes too. For a long time, men have gone, for example, before the holidays, before the Sabbath. People that write Torahs go much more often. It might have been a bathhouse at one time, but certainly it has other spiritual and significant purposes. There's an interesting political angle to it too. There's a mikvah that's used by the conservative and reform rabbis that's at a synagogue in suburban Chicago. The reason primarily that it was built was when the only mikvah available for conversions was in the hands of the Orthodox, even though it was funded by communal money. There used to be a fellow who stood outside the mikvah shouting at non-Orthodox rabbis and converts, "You're not a rabbi, you're not a Jew." And finally, the community decided they had to have a place where conservative and reform rabbis could go with their potential converts, and they could feel comfortable. And so now it's housed in a conservative synagogue, actually. I've done conversions in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Hawaii. I've done them in lakes in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Basically, any body of water would suffice, but overwhelmingly we do them in the kind of protected environment of a mikvah. I want to read you a passage from the prophet Ezekiel, which I think bears on this. Ezekiel uses a metaphor for spiritual significance. He said, "I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean. I will cleanse you from all your uncleanliness, from all your iniquities." And Maimonides, there's an important Maimonides quote. He wrote, "Spiritual purity and impurity are based on Scripture and are not a rationally understood category. So to immersion, often impurity is not about filth, but it's rather about a spiritual kind of issue." And I think we all understand that because, when we take a shower, we take a bath, when even if it's not physical dirt, but it's kind of a sense of wanting to transform yourself spiritually, so the same effect is immersing yourself in a body of ritual water. So that's the role that the mikvah really plays in today's culture. People go for a large number of purposes. The mikvah lady that runs the mikvah that we use, for example, always tells people that following their conversion, don't be afraid to come back for other purposes. Just give her a call, whether it's for them following the menstrual cycle or it's for other significant events in one's life. So mikvah's kind of making a comeback in the non-Orthodox world, but it's definitely for the purposes of the regular monthly cycle used mostly by Orthodox women still and some conservative women. That's a little bit about mikvah, kind of a very important Jewish institution and considered to be critical in the Orthodox world and certainly for mandatory for conversions in the conservative movement. Shalom.